Many games from different developers use different tactics to keep players coming back. Before we get into them, we should go over why they would want to do that in the first place. The way I see it, there are two reasons that developers would care about how long their game is played for. The first one's obvious. If the game is a live service, if it sells DLC of any kind, or if it has a sequel, having an active player base will obviously result in more income for the companies selling the product. And the second is that a game that can be played for a long time is a value proposition for potential players. There are lots of ways to make a game replayable. I have a list of my own, and I'll show it to you as we go. I think it goes without saying, but this won't be comprehensive. I haven't played every game, and my memory rivals that of a goldfish with aluminum in his water supply and a family history of not remembering shit. Without further ado. This is probably the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of people when talking about replayability in games. The basic concept is that once a game's been completed, it can be restarted without losing out on progression. There are a lot of ways to do this. Spider-Man PS4 allows for another playthrough of the game with all previously unlocked suits and gadgets once the game's been completed. It doesn't rebalance the game at all, which can make many encounters trivial, especially if the player reaches a high level before starting New Game Plus. This can be a fun power fantasy for some players, but others will want a more balanced experience. Fortunately, there is an ultimate difficulty that's unlocked once the story is completed, which is a good solution for that problem. Dark Souls lets the player restart the game with the same equipment and levels that they had when they completed it, but it resets all story and map progression. It keeps this experience interesting by increasing the damage, health, and rewards of most enemies, essentially inflating the game's health economy and its literal economy in order to round the game up to the player's current level. Since this is done in a mathematical way, the difficulty increase only plateaus around the 6th or so playthrough according to the wiki. This system allows for the gameplay to extend a lot further than it might otherwise without messing up the game balance and without tons of development time, as encounters don't need to be rebalanced one by one. Unfortunately, this can lead to certain encounters not being balanced fairly, since certain extremes might not be noticed. A similar alternative to this is the New Game Plus in Batman Arkham City. Arkham City allows for Batman to keep all of his gadgets and skill progression, but it rebalances encounters and allows late game enemies to show up from the very beginning. It also removes the icon used for counterattacks, which is a much more reasonable challenge for someone who just completed the game, as they'll have seen the enemy attack animations dozens of times. The encounter rebalancing does require more work from the developers, but it leads to a more balanced experience.
Game balance. Game balance.
Some games don't just allow for another playthrough with previous gear though. Others grant new items and tools that weren't available on the first run. For example, Metal Gear Solid gives the player a bandana or a tuxedo once they've completed the game, depending on a narrative choice they make earlier. Resident Evil 7 lets the player unlock several unique weapons depending on their chosen difficulty in their first playthrough, depending on the completion of certain collectibles, and whether or not they beat the game in 4 hours. Like with Spider-Man, the encounters aren't rebalanced, so the player will have to up the difficulty themselves if they want a greater challenge for their new equipment. I picked Dark Souls as an example earlier because it fits into multiple categories. Let me be honest, I don't really play New Game Plus that much. I much prefer to replay the game with a new build or playstyle. Dark Souls has a wide variety of magic, weapon types, and stats that can be modified to make the gameplay experience different and fresh. Dark Souls does a pretty good job, but there are some shortfalls. Sorcery is notoriously strong, for example, and I think anyone who says they like archery in Souls games is lying and shouldn't be trusted. The opposite is also possible. There's a reason that the Skyrim Stealth Archer is a meme. It's because magic is tedious to use without tons of preparation, and Skyrim's melee combat sucks. It rivals Halo Combat Evolved for awful melee combat. It's so bad. Quick side note, WatchMojo.com puts Skyrim as the 10th best video game with first-person melee combat. Are you serious?
Combat felt tighter and more responsive.
Things just felt tighter and more responsive. Are you kidding me? A necrophiliac's sexual partner is more tight and responsive than this. Sorry about that, I got a little distracted. The point is, you don't want a playstyle to overshadow the others, or the weaker options lose purpose. I feel like going too deep into the way games do skill trees could be its own video, so let's hit the next one. Do you like Minecraft? Hell yeah, you like Minecraft. When a world is procedurally generated, the variety is essentially infinite to any given player. Alright, technically there are only 18 quintillion possible Minecraft worlds available, but somehow I don't think most players are going to run into repeats by accident. It's also not just the worlds that can be generated. RimWorld creates custom settlers for you to deal with that have just as many negative attributes as they do positive ones. It also gives the player a ton of options for how things are generated and how they play out. This may seem like a no-brainer amazing idea then, right? Well, not always. The issue arises when the randomness isn't consistent enough for the gameplay experience to do well. Starting a new game in survival mode in No Man's Sky can be extremely frustrating if there's not enough of a vital resource on the planet you start on. Here's my girlfriend's thoughts on the game. What are your thoughts on No Man's Sky?
I fucking hate it.
Why do you hate it?
Because it's fucking annoying as shit. Like, you just die, and like 90% of the time you can't find the shit that you need. Like, if you need oxygen, you're fucking.
Terraria has certain progression that can only be done by accessing an evil biome. There's a 50% chance it could be Crimson and 50% it could be corrupted, but one of the two is always guaranteed, so there isn't a chance that the player is locked out of the progression due to randomization. On the topic of Terraria, it also fits into the next category. Sandbox games are probably the most replayable type of game on this list. I think just about anyone that's played Minecraft for more than a few minutes has played it for dozens, hundreds, or thousands of hours. But that's not the most compelling part of Minecraft to most. I first played Minecraft as a demo for the Xbox 360, and that demo only let you play on the tutorial world. And it only let you play for 40 or so minutes. I ended up memorizing the location of diamonds so I could quickly get to them before exploring. I played that demo dozens of times, exploring as far as I could and building the tallest buildings I could as quickly as possible. And that was because Minecraft offers an ultimate freedom that most games don't. There are goals to accomplish, and even one that rolls the credits, but the primary incentive to do anything in Minecraft is because you want to. I know a group of people that play Minecraft as simple villager types, each with an assigned role. One's the farmer, one's the blacksmith, one's the hunter. Most games don't allow for something like this. People can rush to the end as quickly as they want to, or they can never enter the nether. You can enter a Minecraft world to build a castle or a flying machine, and both options are allowed for without hindrance. And then there's games like Garry's Mod and Roblox. These are almost platforms more than they are games. Both have a large variety of possible options in gameplay, from racing to platforming to flying to hardcore tactical shootering. This is a Roblox mod, by the way. Games like that will practically never run out of content. And when I say games like that, I mean games with mods. Like I said, never-ending content. Skyrim Special Edition has 45,000 mods just on Nexus Mods, and 10 new ones were made the day I wrote this. Some of which was straight up hardcore pornography, but hey, free content's free content. Skyrim is possibly the best example of modding in any game ever. The modding community is large, talented, and passionate. There are entire games made in Skyrim's engine because of Bethesda's mod tools and the community's passion. Want new quests, characters, outfits, weapons, crafting, flying, dimensions, houses, enemies, AI, and again, hardcore pornography? It's all here, fucko, free and ready. In general, the more in-depth mod tools are, the better off the game is. With most of the systems in this video, there are good times to use them and good times to avoid them. This doesn't really apply to mods. Even in competitive games like CSGO, it's still viable to have mods that don't interfere with the competitive part of the game. Insurgency Sandstorm has mods and a competitive mode. If development time can be found for it, modding should always be added to as many games as possible. Communities can be a great resource for game companies, and it's clearly extremely useful to have people making free content for your game. Modding should also be its own video, to be honest. Final thoughts on this one. The easier a game is to make mods for and install mods on, the better, as long as it doesn't somehow affect non-modded game modes. You were probably waiting for this one. At some level, all games require input from the player to make decisions. That's what separates a game from being a film. But some games have choices made inside of or outside of gameplay that affect the plot and gameplay opportunities for story reasons. Some games have faction reputations that are hard to recover once damaged, and some have multiple choice questions where all the answers are fuck you. Dishonored has a morality system based on how violent the player is, more specifically what % of the enemies in the level are killed. The idea is that the more corpses around, the more the plague spreads, the more people that turn into weepers, and the more people around Corvo the protagonist view him as a crazy killer. This system seems fine at first, but it has some issues. There are 20 abilities and ability upgrades available in Dishonored. Of them, 7 either kill enemies or require killing of enemies for them to function. If the player commits to a low chaos playthrough, they are choosing to shelve 35% of the magic system. Here's the more personal issue for me. Killing people in Dishonored looks cool and it's fun to do. You can stab enemies quickly from behind, you can kill them from the air, you can shoot them with arrows and guns, you can sword fight them, and you can attach razor mines to an arrow in slow motion to tear them apart. If the player wants to knock out an enemy, they can shoot them with a sleep arrow or they can choke them out. That's basically it. The idea that a morality system makes it easier to do the wrong thing is fine with me. That's kind of how it tends to work in real life. But making a certain moral path in a game less fun is a mistake. Dishonored 2 fixed a lot of this issue by allowing non-lethal air attacks, choking in combat, and kicking enemies when they're on the ground to knock them out. Some games have choices that don't affect the outcome of the story, but nonetheless can make the player think about the choices they made in a way only a game can. I can't really go into detail without spoiling the game, but Soma had me make choices I'm still not sure I agree with. There's an alternate version of this I don't like. Some games give the impression that the choices you make matter, but by the end none of them really do. Life is Strange gives the player a lot of choices to make over the course of its story, but then contrives an apocalypse as a moral choice that essentially erases all the previous decisions. Telltale's first Walking Dead game suffers from a similar condition. Being told your decisions matter ironically doesn't matter if the game railroads itself into the exact same situation by the end. The polar opposite of this is one of my favorite games, Fallout New Vegas. New Vegas takes into account your morality, the factions you help, and what you say to companions when it gives you your ending. There are 7 different endings for the Great Khans, 8 for the Fiends, and 11 for Arcade Ganon. Fallout New Vegas can be played many times before an identical ending is achieved. Another game with a tremendous amount of choice that greatly affects the story is Not for Broadcast. In it, you play as a news producer in a satirical British utopia. I don't want to get into details because this game does deserve to be experienced without spoilers, but the choices in this game are extremely meaningful, carefully hidden behind game mechanics, and they'll make you question what you believe is right and what's wrong. On a less emotional note, some developers just create a modified version of the original game to play with. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time has an alternate version that was released with the GameCube re-release that changes dungeon layouts and messes with how puzzles work. This allows for people that have played the game multiple times to still receive a challenge while playing. The 3DS remaster also reverses the rest of the game world, leading to a familiar but different world for players to adventure through. On a similar note, Resident Evil 2 lets the player choose between playing as Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield when they start the game. This isn't just a reskin with different dialogue, however. Weapon selection, map layouts, and plot details are different, allowing for a different experience the second time through. Unfortunately, this isn't always how it's done. Eternal Darkness has 3 available paths that can be played through, but once one is completed, it's unavailable until the others are completed. In order to get the true ending, the player has to complete the game 3 times with only minor variations in gameplay. The red path is also harder than the others, so if it was played first, the other 2 playthroughs would be considered trivial by the player. Most games, especially single-player ones, have some form of character progression. Sam Fisher gets his rifle after a few levels, the Courier upgrades skills and gets perks, and Spider-Man gets new gadgets and moves to play with. The goal is to make the player feel more powerful as time goes on. There's another way to obtain this effect. Some games have a unique set of mechanics that require time and practice to master. Let's head back to Dark Souls the final time. A new player will struggle with basic dodging, while those with a lot of experience can beat it with bananas as a controller. I'm going to refer to this as player progression as opposed to character progression. The pros of this system are pretty obvious. It's just intuitively satisfying for humans to master things. Going from someone who gets beat up by a mini-boss in Sifu to someone who can defeat dozens of enemies without being hit gives an intense sense of mastery. Unfortunately, this does have its downsides. Balancing's hard, and balancing a game to fit the most casual and hardcore players is basically impossible. Difficulty options can be a help, but letting players off the hook, as it were, can push some who would otherwise have risen to the challenge away from it. Some players just want to take the path of least resistance, and some will write stupid articles for Polygon. Sometimes a game needs to push a player, but figuring out how hard can be as challenging as a banana percent no-hit run. I would like to thank Icarus Gaming and Godlike Games, along with other members of my stream chat, for helping me write this video. This video is meant to help create a discussion on game design, so if you'd like to participate, you know where the comment section is. It's going a bit slowly, but I am still working on my Assassin's Creed video, so keep an eye out. I thank you very much for your time, and as always, subscribe to my fucking YouTube channel!